Putin recently did like a how we have a State of the Union here in the United States. Well, he did like a the Russian equivalent there, and he basically was talking about how he would like to be allies with the U.S. or on good terms with the U.S. Um, but we do set up a lot of. The thing is, we're creating a lot of tensions by setting up a lot of bases up against the Russian border, and so Russia is feeling threatened by that. They've been ramping up their military. We talked about on a previous episode how they created this hypersonic missile delivery system that could, carry nukes. That's like 9 times the speed of sound. And Putin claims that, with that, he has like the advantage now that their nuclear deterrence doesn't exist anymore with Russia because they have that technology. That supposedly they can just wipe us out before we even have a chance to retaliate if they wanted to. So this is Putin talking big, covered by RT America, which by the way is Russian-owned news, but I do find that a lot of their coverage is more objective when it comes to news about the United States. They're free, of course, to be a little bit more critical because although a lot of the, on RT America, almost all the anchors are American themselves and former, government officials and, well-known independent journalists and things like that. And it's kind of sad that you have to go to Russian news to get like truth about America because the mainstream media is so monolithic in the United States. It's there's not much competition as far as opinion. It's a lot of the news organizations parrot the same things. And even with like Fox News or something like that, it's controlled opposition. I mean, most media companies are in big cities, which are mostly liberal, and even on Fox News, a lot of people there are actually liberal, and they are allowed to exist because they're controlled opposition. Republicans and Democrats work together on a lot of different things, primarily, the military-industrial complex. They're all beholden to the military-industrial complex, which is the most corrupt and powerful entity. Wow, this shit's like falling apart. In the United States, the most powerful lobbying group. I mean, they get military-industrial complex. I mean, Department of Defense, the Pentagon, they get over half of the discretionary budget, $700-something billion a year. We've talked about that as well. So anyways, let's get into this video.
Our top story begins in Moscow, where Russian President Vladimir Putin just wrapped up his State of the Nation address earlier today. It was a speech that saw Putin touch on many issues. The most prominent, though, a warning to the rest of the world. RT's Ilya Petrenko has a full wrap.
I'll start with how the Russian president got to the final part of his speech, where he elaborated on America and its allies, plus how Russia gets along with them. He said that he was obliged to bring this issue up after Washington tore up the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The Donald Trump administration insisted on that after the idea first surfaced in Washington last year. Mr. Putin called on the American leadership to be honest about the actual reasons why they were leaving the treaty. And the Russian president believes that these reasons are Russia and America being obliged to limit their missile arsenals while other countries not being put in that position. Here's what else we heard from Mr. Putin on that.
Well, our US partners had to be honest and straightforward with us. They should not have used trumped-up accusations and allegations to unilaterally withdraw from it, like they did in 2002, which they did in an honest way, when they pulled out of the IBM treaty. I felt it was done the wrong way, but at least they did it in a straightforward manner. But how do they act, in fact? They violate everything, then find excuses to put the blame on someone.
Moreover, they mobilize their allies, who oink along with them.
So while addressing the lawmakers in some way, Mr. Putin addressed the American...
And by the way, Russia and the United States, we both have thousands of nuclear missiles that could destroy the world many times over. So, largely, the creation of new nuclear weapons is just, another way to waste money, give more money to the military-industrial complex. It's just a waste. And some could argue that, you got to update the technology and stuff like that. But still, I mean, you could still fuck somebody up with even a 20-year-old nuke.
Leadership as well, and the gist was Russia is not a threat for America and its allies, but it could become one if these countries start being aggressive against Moscow.
Russia wants to have a proper, friendly and equal relationship with the US. Russia does not pose a threat to anyone. Any actions we take are retaliatory, that is to say, in defense. We never seek confrontation. We do not want it, especially with a global power like the US.
And this was the point when the Russian president may even have sounded aggressive, definitely serious. The Russian president began to talk what his country would be forced to do, an R&D, an actual military deployment if the Western military expansion continues.
Military deployment?
Russia will be forced to produce weapons that can be used not only against those territories where direct threats originate from, but also against the places where the decision makers are located. Let the US take into account the range and speed of our prospective weapons, and then they can make a decision that might create an additional threat to our country.
However, we kept hearing it time and again that the bear only roars when someone attacks it. Anything that Russia would choose to do will only be in response to hostile actions, and the Russian president still believes that the way to sort out all the global issues, the best way to do that is to make steps towards each other, positive steps.
All right, joining us now to discuss Russian President Vladimir Putin's...
I agree because, it doesn't benefit us to antagonize Russia. It's dangerous that when you have the liberal media, trying to demonize Russia, it's just a holdover of neocons, trying to continue the Cold War. That's the neocon thing. So, how are you liberal if you've adopted the neocon foreign policy where, Russia is still the enemy and we have to continuously, continue this Cold War against them? We talked about in a previous episode of the Sunday Morning Show that Canada has a higher GDP than Russia. Like, Russia is not really that economically powerful. They put money into military and things like that, but, they're not nearly as big a threat as you might think. And during the Cold War, their military capacity was actually promoted to be a lot higher than it really was. They would have parades down the street, sending like tanks and soldiers, but then they would come around in a loop so that it looks like the army is bigger than it actually is. A lot of propaganda on both sides really bolstered up the Soviet Union at the time, as the enemy, as a big enemy, a big threat. They do have nukes, but they're not nearly as powerful as everybody promotes them to be.
Address. We're being joined now by former Pentagon official Michael Maloof. All right, Mike, Putin made clear in his version of the State of the Union address that he wanted to build a friendly relationship based on mutual respect with the U.S., but at the same time, he also criticized the U.S. for employing what he calls illegal sanctions on Russia, among a host of other moves, like Ilya Petrenko just said, the INF Treaty. Do you believe his desire to be friendly with the U.S., is it genuine?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that it's been going all along, even before Trump was elected, that agreed that there's a need for the United States and Russia to work together on a myriad of issues, geostrategic and political issues, and terrorism. And there's a lot of things that they can do in a mutual way. What I'm concerned about today and what I'm hearing from Trump administration officials is that they're going to be increasing more sanctions here very shortly on the U.S. And one of the responses and options could be that the United States might even lower diplomatic relations with Moscow as a consequence. This is an option that's also being bandied about, and I'm very concerned about that. There's no reason for this, and this is a generated, a manufactured crisis that, thanks to John Bolton, his comfort zone is hating Russia,
right?
And it's
comfort zone,
and it's just and it's getting irritating, and no useful purpose is served by having this kind of brinkmanship.
Now, President Trump has been accused over and over of being this Putin puppet, but here we are, like you said, more sanctions, withdrawals from landmark treaties.
Right.
I mean, really, isn't it just time for another détente?
Well, yeah, I thought we were on the road to one, but
right, that's
but then the neocons took over again. You see,
right?
And
you've been saying that this is a Bolton foreign policy administration.
Oh, it is. It's Bolton at his best, and he's very anti-Russian, and this also suits the other neocons who look upon Russia as the main nemesis.
And if you don't know who John Bolton is, he was another signee from the Project of a New American Century, which basically was a commission of neocons that included Bill Kristol, Donald Rumsfeld, Cheney, and they basically charted a course for foreign policy, United States, of, basically they just lined up a bunch of countries that, they felt like that we needed to, invade and conquer in order to maintain our political hegemony. Project of a New American Century. I highly recommend that you check this out. Robert Kagan, Bill Kristol, right? So it's a neoconservative think tank based in Washington, D.C. that focused on United States foreign policy. So this has continued. It was established in 1997, but the policies from this have continued since then. It's only 4 years before 9/11. The goal was to promote American global leadership, basically hegemony, control over the globe. The organization stated that American leadership is good both for America and for the world, and sought to build support for a Reaganite policy of military strength and moral clarity. Of the 25 people who signed Pnac's founding statement of principles, 10 went on to serve in the administration of U.S. President George W. Bush, including Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and Paul Wolfowitz. So basically, going back to Reagan, a lot of our foreign policy has been pretty much the same. Even Bill Clinton meddled in foreign affairs, with Kosovo. But then, after 9/11, Bush ramped up the war on terror, and that basically was fulfilling a lot of this right here.
Well, for the rest of the hour, we'll hear General Wesley Clark in his own words on the possibility of a U.S. attack on Iran, the impeachment of President Bush, the use of cluster bombs, the bombing of radio television Serbia during the Kosovo War under his command, and much more. I interviewed General Clark on Tuesday at the 92nd Street Y in New York. Now let's talk about Iran. You have a whole website devoted to stopping war.
www.stopiranwar.com.
Do you see a replay of what happened in the lead up to the war with Iraq? The allegations of the weapons of mass destruction, the media leaping on to the bandwagon?
Well, in a way, but you know, history doesn't repeat itself exactly twice. What I did warn about when I testified in front of Congress in 2002, I said, if you want to worry about a state, it shouldn't be Iraq, it should be Iran. But this government, our administration, wanted to worry about Iraq, not Iran. I knew why, because I'd been through the Pentagon right after 9/11. About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you."
I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
I'm not going to give you his name.
So go through the countries again.
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran. So when you look at Iran, you say...
So, after that, they did go into Libya and Syria and Yemen. Trying to think what I can remember about Sudan and Somalia, but I know Obama was infamous for conducting drone campaigns in like 9 different countries. Obama's covert drone war in numbers 10 times more strikes than Bush, from 2017 from the Council of Foreign Relations. Targeted killing program. On January 23rd, 2009, just 3 days into his presidency, President Obama authorized his first kinetic military action, 2 drone strikes 3 hours apart in Waziristan, Pakistan, that killed as many as 20 civilians. So this happened a lot during the Obama administration. A lot of civilians got killed overseas through drone strikes. One of the most famous one was that 16-year-old that was like an American but like they try to join al-Qaeda or something like that. I really just want a list of the countries that is this the list? Okay, yeah. So going back to this, Wesley Clark was talking about this memo that he was told about that included these countries. This was, let's see, when was this interview? I think, was this a 2007 interview?
You say, is it a
Oops. Oh, it's 2007. That's from 2007. So in 2007, he talked about this guy that showed him. He won't even name who it was, but some official in the Pentagon said, "Here's this memo about, like, first of all, he was saying, like, he just said that they didn't know why they were going into Iraq." And then the guy was like, "Oh, more so, Mr. Clark, here's 7 countries that we're slated to go into: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran." So that's 2007. He said that. Obama, elected in 2008, started in 2009. This says that, he started drone striking 3 days after he started his presidency. So here's the number of killings and fatalities. So let's see. Pakistan, which is not part of Wesley Clark's list, but Pakistan, number of strikes 403, total killed 3,000. Number of civilians killed 288. Percentage of civilians killed 9%. So that's just the total numbers. What's the highest percentage? What's TBIJ? That's a different. Is that something else? What is that? LWJ. What is that? What does that even mean? Total. So 12% actually. Civilians. So that was the real total for Pakistan. 406 total. 3,086 total people. 380 of those civilians. In Yemen, which is part... No, that's not part of it. But, okay. So, Yemen, total 154 strikes, 818 people in total, 69 civilians. That's 8% civilians. Somalia, which is part of that memo that Wesley Clark was shown. 22 strikes, 286 people killed. 3 were civilians, just 1% civilians. Oh wait, this is the total for that. Okay. So I know this isn't it. I'm pretty sure that he bombed other countries. This is from the Council of Foreign Relations, so I wouldn't expect them to be entirely have everything, because, well, you just need to know about the Council of Foreign Relations. Let's see. Map shows where President Barack Obama dropped his... Funny story. I actually did like a catering gig at the Council of Foreign Relations. It's interesting. Map shows where President Barack Obama dropped his 20,000 bombs. So this was 2016. Syria 12,000, Iraq 12,000, Libya 496, Yemen 35, Somalia 14, Afghanistan 1,337, Pakistan 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 countries, just not this 7. I guess Sudan and Somalia and Lebanon didn't get as much action as they had originally planned. So anyways, we kind of went off track a bit. Let's go back to this.
as well as China, so that they can increase their defense spending. I mean, they are in the pockets of the defense industries, and the only way you deal with this is to increase defense spending. But in order to do that, you got to have a crisis somewhere.
Right. You got to have an enemy.
You got to have an enemy, and Russia today is the boogeyman. But what I'm concerned about is that these political games that they're playing could result in some real tragedy. Particularly arms races or something somewhere that could spark an episode that could just cascade into an uncontrollable crisis.
Now, speaking of arms, let's talk about Russia and NATO's expansion. Macedonia being the latest European country to join, they're encroaching on Russia's border. Missiles are going to be stored there. Is that a legitimate argument to make against the West and its NATO allies? Because originally, NATO was formed, to fend off the former Soviet Union. That's no more. NATO keeps building. Arms keep going closer and closer to the border.
Well, this is a neocon approach. They want to do everything they can to improve NATO because they look upon Russia as a nemesis. Look, the United States violated an understanding that President Clinton had with the Russian leadership on promising not to do exactly what is going on today, and that is moving NATO right up to the line. Now what we're seeing is not only missiles going into Poland, into Romania, for anti-missile defense, which can easily become offensive. But we're also seeing non-NATO countries in the periphery surrounding the Federation, particularly like Georgia, that wants to now work with the United States to build an airstrip right up against the former Soviet Union. I mean, what's Putin's reaction going to be to that? I mean, I recall 2006, and it could happen, or 2008 rather, and it could happen again.
And now on other relations, Putin praised his country's relationship with China, with India, Japan, and he says he's seeking to restore relations with the EU. Do you foresee that happening, especially since Moscow and Munich are moving forward with talks on the Nord Stream 2 project?
Oh, sure, because you're seeing the result and the emergence of a new multipolar world order here. These countries are so fed up with the United States in terms of their leadership or lack thereof, and the constant belligerency that this seems to be coming out of Washington toward other countries, even toward our closest allies, that they're saying, enough, we're just going to go in another direction.
We're going to do our own thing.
Yeah, we're just going to do our own bit, and it's prudent upon, from a geostrategic standpoint, for Putin to do this with EU. He doesn't particularly care for the EU, but if he can garner more support for and exports into the Eurasia Economic Union, he's all for it. And
business. It's all business.
Oh, yeah, it's all business.
Not personal. It's business.
Yeah, it's all business.
So, yeah, so we got all this stuff lined up. I mean, you could imagine how defensive our country would be if Russia had anti-missile defense in Cuba. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? Which almost started World War III. So, our government is playing with fire, and having John Bolton as the national security consultant, or fucking whatever the fuck he is right now. What the hell is he right now? John Bolton, you fucking big mustache motherfucker. Is the National Security Advisor. He basically runs the foreign policy right now. He was an ambassador, Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Affairs from 01 to 05. Assistant Secretary of State for International Affairs. I wonder what he was doing between 2006 and 2018. I don't know. He probably was in the private sector doing some shit. Probably lobbying for the military-industrial complex.